Alright, hey everybody. My name is Mark Wolf. I discovered the grand unified theory of game design. The basic primer is in the description below, and today we are talking about solvability. A real game can't be solvable. So if you followed this series so far, then nothing I say in this video should surprise you, at least not about solvability. That's why I mentioned in I think the last video that I'm not doing anything special. Everything is very transparent and everything is right here on the surface. If you read the primer and you understand it, then that's all that's being done in order to make a game. You just have to follow the theory. So to discuss solvability, like always, we're going to go through what it is, kind of why, and then go through some examples. And the basic thesis here is that solvability makes a game trivial. In other words, it makes gameplay meaningless. It leaves players with no reason to engage in the activity except perhaps to learn firsthand that gameplay is trivial. Solvability in the context of game design means, of course, predetermining the outcome. You can word this a number of different ways, for example, being able to determine the outcome without gameplay, but this applies universally and at each level of abstraction from local interactions to the scope of the game itself. If you've predetermined the outcome, then there's no reason for the player to engage in the activity. In a real game, the skill and actions alone of the players, their action or their application of their full customization of strategy without undermining their agency, and again with everything else about the grand unified theory of game design being theory compliant in the design, is what determines victory. And all of these things allow for that to happen. So solvability undermines that. And it can be caused by a number of different factors, but either directly, like most commonly imbalance, or by imbalance, but it can also be by being unfair, and also commonly by lacking full customization of strategy, which is a previous lesson video in this series you can go back and watch if you haven't yet. But I think essentially when you limit customization of strategy, you're basically making something unfair, which in turn can make it solvable. Or which in turn I think does make it solvable. Although other things that may not be qualifying to that may violate something else. Like, for instance, just not being a competition in the first place could be a big one. So now we can get into some examples. And the first one that I always like to start with is tic-tac-toe. And it's because it's very simple to understand that once you understand how tic-tac-toe is solvable, that if you're like all things being equal, so long as you're playing against someone who also fully understands tic-tac-toe, every instance of gameplay is going to end in a draw. So gameplay becomes trivial. And the reason it's a good point to start with is because, like I said, this is true at every level. When you get something that's solvable, it makes it just as trivial as tic-tac-toe. This is true for every game that violates not being solvable. And we've covered some examples of this also in previous videos with like action RPGs and having enemy routines. Sometimes tabletop RPGs too fall into this. Dungeons and Dragons sometimes falls into this, and there's a lot of good online content where people rebuild monster manual entries to make them more dynamic. And I think the trick that people have learned, and this is correct, is that instead of having attack routines, which are solvable, you give the enemy sort of its own little AI. You sort of give it its own dynamic set of goals that it's trying to achieve. And based on what you're doing as an opponent, as a player, it's going to change what it does in response to you because it has a certain thing that it's trying to achieve. And your strategy is competing against it. And, this is in contrast to like sort of bigger scale things in video games where you have like boss fights. And, this is like in Zelda, in Star Fox, and shoot 'em ups, and side scrollers, a whole lot of other knock games. Not that not that those genres are disqualified necessarily. It's just the way they've been designed are. Is the glowy eyes McWeak to arrows bosses, a term coined by Ego Raptor in that Zelda video that he does. It's really, really good. It's just the designer's idea of skill is waiting. That's all it is. It's just waiting for the opening, waiting for the boss to tell you, hey, it's time to hit me. And it's just sort of making it feel important to the player, making it feel like it's an investment because you're spending time doing it. But it's not really a challenge. It's not really, you don't have any agency. It's not responding to you in any way. You're just sort of playing out a movie with extra steps. And this is kind of even more exemplified in games that are quite literally just giant hallways that are things like everywhere from, I mean, like the more recent Space Marine games, you know, like Gears of War or like Final Fantasy 13 or something like that. And even down to like Super Mario. And it's just this, like, you can think of it in two different ways. Super Mario is more like a memory, you know, exercise. It's more like a I don't know if it's quite a sport, but it definitely is like a test of physical skill, not really physical skill, but like physical aptitude, in addition to memorization, memorizing all the sequences. Whereas something like Space Marine, it's not so much memorization, it's really just that straight time wasting where it's saying like, you have to hold the button for this long, pointing your character in this direction at these things called enemies that don't really have, like, it's not, there's no agency in either you or what the enemy is doing. It's just sort of like, hey, kill these enemies for this long until the next scene. It's just a movie with extra steps. And it's a very fancy time waster. That's what it is. And there's a whole lot of problems with that. There's a whole lot of problems that come from violating player agency in that way. And it all results in the activity being meaningless. There's no reason to do it. You're just arbitrarily saying, hey, you have to do all these things. There's no point to it, though. There's no point in finishing Mario. And you can also see this in something like Monopoly. There's, in contrast to tic-tac-toe, the solvability of Monopoly leads to random outcomes if all players follow solved gameplay. So when everybody's acting optimally, then it's just going to result in random outcomes because the only thing determining those game states is the dice rolls. And this is another major disqualifier for a whole lot of other board games, which are disqualified entirely as a genre of design. And I think this is really exemplified in chess. And I don't know if all game states ideally result in a draw the way that tic-tac-toe does, but this is the reason why a whole lot of high-level chess players become disillusioned. This is why Bobby Fischer stopped playing. He became aware, and many high-level players will fully admit to this, that chess is just a memorization sport. And so he stopped playing and then tried to address the issue by creating different formats of chess. And you can see that Fischer random format failed at solving the issue because it didn't address fully the problems of formal game theory. You can't really get out of solvability by retaining enough chessness to call it a chess variant. In order for anything related to chess to qualify as a real game, it would have to not first be a board game. Coming back to Magic the Gathering, this is another one of those things where it's important to understand the full ramifications of like what you're doing, because you can, like, it's simple to just, like, you could avoid the problem entirely just by making sure that when you're designing it to make both local interactions with enemies and the game itself to not be solvable. You never run into the issues if you're just always designing theory-compliant games, but you can see with all of the examples throughout history, the different issues you can run into with solvability. And I think economically, it's good to understand something like trading card games, or like trading card games and pay-to-win video games, where the absence of real game design and the focus on solvability is an actual business plan goal for the product that takes it out of being a game and makes it a scam, where it's being presented as a game, but it's a solvable activity that they're capitalizing on. And so Magic being solvable, and all trading card games being solvable, with the exception of Mage War, because it is transparently balanced. When you have solvability in trading card games, it results in being pay to win. And it results in the player's actions, the customization of strategy, the full customization of strategy, all becoming meaningless. Like, their decisions don't matter because all trading card games follow the same business plan laid out by Magic the Gathering. And it seems like this is a good idea. It seems like, oh, well, if they're making money on it, it's right. But again, the question is, well, how much money could you make if they did it correctly, if they were making a real game? And so some of the things that I would like to see Magic the Gathering do, although, as I've said in the previous video covering this, I'm not sure how they would actually go about this. But first, of course, making sure that all the cards are balanced. But in covering full customization of strategy, there's a whole lot of design holes that Magic has left for various reasons over the years, that kind of like, they've set the game up so that they're doing things the hard way. The only things that are available to players is the cards they've printed. And this is what they're trying to capitalize on, is the scarcity of cards. And this is how you funnel players into solved strategies. But I think all trading card games really need to focus first on starting with the big problems in solvability, and then really getting down to like the nitty gritty. They fully understand the math of their games, so this isn't something they can't do. There's something they're not incentivized in their minds to do. They don't understand yet that there is incentive to do this. But some of the things that you could focus on is eliminating infinite combos and first turn wins. First turn wins, obviously, you've created a system of solvability, and at the extreme of that is first turn wins, where you've completely eliminated your opponent's agency. There is no agency. They have no responses. You win on the first turn. And it's funny that you can see this same sort of thing, this odd dynamic in infinite combos. It's kind of elusive. It seems like, whoa, that's a really fun, cool idea, infinite combos. But every time you play it, it's unsatisfying. And the reason is because it's taking away agency. Every single time you could iterate on that ability, your opponent should have an opportunity for a response. But when you run into those combos, there is no iteration on that. You're not limited on resources. The game breaks and allows you to win because it's solved. And, well, I don't know if it's if the issue there is maybe solved or unfair, but if you have an infinite combo that's readily accessible in a game, that I think is a situation of solvability where it's a win condition. So if you have any questions about solvability, I'd be very curious. There was a whole lot of people anticipating this video, but again, if you've watched everything leading up to this, nothing in this video should have surprised you. The whole point is that players and their agency, their skill to play the game, and their actions in the game are the only things that can be determining the outcome. And this is just one of the ways that you can violate that. So don't. Hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed. Let's see here. The next topic, I guess, is then going to be real games can't be, or victory can't be random. Pretty sure that's the next topic. Sorry for the delay. Life has been very busy. Just had a lot to deal with, so trying to get these out when I can, whenever there's a spare moment. So Thank you again, and I will see you in the next one.